Well, welcome everyone to the Spoken Gospel Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a very special episode today because I have found myself another Bible engagement nerd and a friend for a couple of years now. But I'm very excited for you to get to know him, his ministry, and the one that he's been a part of, a ministry that's been around for over 80 years, I think, now.
Yep.
And they're doing amazing stuff in the world. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into a conversation about what is Bible engagement, how should we be thinking about reading the Bible, and his organization has done a lot of research around how people are engaging the Bible and kind of what their vision for Bible engagement is for people today. So I'm very excited to have that conversation. I know you guys will love it. But before we get into all of that, let me introduce you to my friend Daniel Day. Daniel, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, and you said Bible engagement nerd, and that immediately made me think of a story
of
when I was in seminary and I was learning.
Where'd you go to seminary?
Fuller Theological Seminary.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was such a good experience on so many levels. But I did a lot of studying at home, obviously, and my kids are pretty young, and studying Hebrew, studying the book of Jonah. The end of Jonah just has a hilarious ending in Hebrew, which is like...
It's like an incomplete
and
sentence,
much cattle.
Yeah,
it's like the last phrase.
Yeah.
And I found that hilarious. So I run downstairs, and I'm like, Rebecca, my wife, Noah, my son, guys, do you know how Jonah ends? And much cattle. Ha 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 ha. And they just look at me like, you're crazy. So when you said Bible engagement nerd, I think that fits a little more than I want to admit.
Yeah, you got to own it, man.
You got to
own it. That's good. So tell us about your family, Rebecca.
Yeah. So Rebecca was my high school sweetheart as well.
I married my high school sweetheart too.
Really?
Right.
That's awesome,
man. I forgot about that.
So we are coming up on 18 years
of
marriage, which is awesome.
Coming up on 15, so we're
cool.
hot on your tail.
Yeah.
So keep up the pace.
Yeah. And 3 kids, 15-year-old, 13-year-old, 11-year-old, and 2 boys, little girl. And live in Michigan, which is where Our Daily Bread Ministries is located in the U.S., at least, that office. Love living in Michigan. So just got out of maple syrup season and boiling maple sap down to syrup, which is so fun. I love doing that every year.
Do you just get that out of your backyard?
Yeah. We've got some acres and some trees, and so I love tapping trees every year. It's one of my favorite things. Cool. And if you end up on a Zoom call with me at some point during that time of year, there's a good chance I'm sitting outside and there's vapor, going past my face as I'm in a meeting, because it's great.
That's amazing.
So slow process things that are where I find a lot of joy.
That's awesome.
So
And so tell us, you mentioned Our Daily Bread Ministries there in Michigan. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Our Daily Bread Ministries, as you said, has been around for over 80 years and has a really cool start to it where Dr. Imar Dahan, doctor as in medical doctor.
Okay. Helpful.
Yep. Was just realizing how important it was for people to understand the scriptures. Yeah. And so he got on a radio and opened his Bible and started teaching the Bible.
Was it extemporaneous? Or did he have notes?
He had a lot of notes because later people were asking him for the notes, and that's actually the roots of what becomes the Our Daily Bread Ministries devotional. Okay. Right. So which there's another version of it that called Discovery Series that was more in line with where the notes went, but yeah, he just was super passionate about people understanding the scriptures. So Detroit Bible Class is where it started. And eventually they moved to Grand Rapids, became Radio Bible Class. And then back in, I think, 2015, because of how successful the devotional had been at helping people connect scriptures with everyday life, they rebranded to Our Daily Bread Ministries, and which is what we've been since then. And it's based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And a lot of people know it for the little booklets, devotional booklets.
Yes. Yeah. As soon as I kind of went and visited you guys about 3 years ago and came back, and I was like, I just met this amazing organization, Our Daily Bread Ministries. Everybody I told, they're like, the little books?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you'll see them at restaurants sometimes and see them in hotels, see them at churches. And so it's been around for 80 years, and now it's all over the world. I mean, 30 offices around the world. Wow. And I always get these numbers mixed up, but it's either 150 countries and 58 languages or the other way around.
Okay.
So something like that. And we have, many of those offices are really small and just, little people that are super faithful and super passionate about Our Daily Bread, and it gets interpreted in their language, and then like in their living room, they'll pack envelopes and ship them out and stuff like that. So it's a really cool legacy ministry that does so much more than that too. There's like training for lay leaders through Our Daily Bread University. We have a whole film team that does incredible like documentary style films. The most recent one, Juneteenth, the story of faith and freedom.
Yeah, it was really good.
And it went like through PBS and had really good distribution. So there's a lot.
Yeah, I saw even on the ODBM YouTube channel, like lots of cool like journeys through Israel stuff.
So we have a guy that works with us a lot. His name's Jack Beck. He's a Bible geographer is kind of what he calls himself, and just shows how the story of the land in the Bible tells the story of the Bible. It's called the Holy Land series. Cool. All of that's free too, which is cool. So
that's awesome. Yeah. And then part of Our Daily Bread Ministries, out of that came Reclaim Today, which you are leading right now. Yeah. How did that happen, and what's the vision there? What are you guys up to?
Yeah, so I'm a co-host on one of our Bible teaching show called Discover the Word. And so I joined the ministry kind of doing that, and then ended up joining full-time to help the ministry start podcasting. So we started some podcasts because I had a radio background before that. And then after being there for a little while, some leaders came to me and a couple others and were like, hey, we really want to start kind of a next generation move within the ministry. And we'd love for your team, so you and a couple others, just to spend time getting to know those in their 20s and 30s in particular, and collect all the research you can, synthesize it. What are their questions? What are their concerns? What are their joys? What are their delights? What are they looking for, especially as it relates to understanding faith and the scriptures? And so there was this question that kind of kept coming up that we felt like maybe that's the question that we could help with. And that is, how does faith relate to my everyday life? Like, where does it connect? Yeah. I know I should go to church. I know I should pray. I know I should read the Bible. But how does following Jesus impact, the fear I feel before going into a meeting with my boss, right? Or how does my faith impact the things that we spend most of our lives doing, right? So doing dishes, laundry, whatever it is in our day. That's where we spend most of our time. Right. And so does my faith impact that or not? Or is it just for, Sundays and Wednesday nights and whatever else back in the day? And so it was like, okay, well, let's lean into that. And what should we call ourselves? And we had a bunch of different names that we were trying to figure out.
What was the name on the lowest name on the list for the idea?
Oh gosh, like the ones that definitely didn't happen.
Did not make the cut.
Well, I'll tell you the one that we thought was going to be the winner.
Oh, okay.
And wasn't.
What was it?
Every Moment Sacred.
Oh, okay. Actually,
I thought that was cool and kind of trendy.
That prayer book, Every Moment Holy.
Yeah. Similar kind of similar theme type of sacred. Every moment matters kind of thing.
It does sound more like a book or than an organization.
Yep. And we thought in particular, there's so much vintage stuff now.
Yeah, totally.
People are interested in that.
In the sacred.
Right. So sacred. Like,
let's bring the sacred into my moment.
Yeah, let's bring that word back.
I get it.
Yeah. So we did a focus group on that. And it was summarized as the word sacred. How was it worded exactly? I think it was they lit it on fire as how much people did not like the word sacred.
My gosh, that's some feedback from a focus group.
That was right. So that was helpful. And so we ended up, somewhat starting over, and we kept coming back to this word reclaim, reclaimed. And I think what it was this idea that we've been reclaimed from sin and death and invited into God's work of reclaiming the world.
That's right.
And it's also a little trendy, right? Like reclaimed wood, reclaimed furniture, reclaimed buildings, those kind of things. But it was that like, man, this captures the gospel in one word. Yeah. Reclaimed. And then it was like, but like, what are we inviting people into? And there's so much stress about the past, right? Fear, shame, regret in our pasts. There's a lot of joys and things too, right? But especially in younger generations, there's a lot of conversations about hurt in the past and a lot of emphasis on therapy of processing that, really good things. Yeah. It's like God God gives us grace and mercy every day, right? It's new every morning. And that stuff's in the past. It's forgiven.
Yeah.
And so we can leave it there. We can learn from it, of course, right? We don't want to forget our history. The Bible's full of don't forget your history.
Definitely. Yeah. Here, eat a meal. Remember what happened.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. But we've been reclaimed from that. And then also there's so much pressure and fear and worry about tomorrow.
That's right.
Right. And Jesus had a lot to say about that too, which was don't worry about tomorrow because today, plenty to worry about today. So reclaim today. That's kind of where it was born is what does it look like to walk with God in this moment?
Yeah. And that came out of kind of the questions that you were trying to answer around what is this next generation thinking about, where's their starting point with faith, all that kind of stuff. And so it was like, okay, they're worried about the past. They're concerned about the future. We need to bring, and they're curious about what does this huge God and the story of the Bible have to do with me and my everyday life today.
And especially the Bible, because it's an ancient book full of ancient stories, mentions ancient people, ancient cultures, right? And we live in a world with like a subway and metros and airplanes. Yeah. We live in a world with, computers and devices and apps and things that the Bible doesn't talk about.
Yeah. Doesn't that make the Bible irrelevant or too
ancient,
outdated to be helpful?
Yeah. In fact, those are some of the words that came out of that was
in your research.
Yep. People feeling like the Bible was ancient, outdated, irrelevant to their lives. And the Bible is completely relevant. Yeah. But we have to do a little work sometimes to see how themes that maybe they were dealing with at a different time, different place, actually do relate to the themes we experience.
So when you think about how is the Bible relevant, or what does it have to do with my day to day, or when you're just trying to think about walking someone into a different view of the Bible than they have. What are your favorite kind of like starting points or paradigm shifts that you try to lead people into?
Yeah. So for me, and one of the fun things about this particular work is we get to think about all the things that we run into as well on a daily basis.
That's true.
What does the Bible say about that, or how does it speak into it, or whatever? So it's also a really life-giving thing because, we're a part of the very audience we're reaching. So a lot of times we get to write from our own perspectives and things like that too, which is cool. But kind of the model that's really come out for us is starting with research. So what are people worried about? What are they thinking about? What are they excited about? What are some of the questions they have? What do they want to know better? And then starting there. So for example, anxiety, worry, mental health. Yeah. Something a lot of people talk a lot about. So we're like, okay, we're all thinking about this, right? We're a very anxious culture, very anxious world. Yeah. A lot of this Reclaim Today was actually started during COVID.
Oh, wow.
So COVID, as we saw, ramped up anxiety to a whole nother level.
Yes.
For many, many people. And so let's start with something like anxiety, right? So we will then think about, okay, who is God as it relates to our anxiety? And how might God, who has all these different names in the scriptures, for example, meet us in like an anxious moment? Yeah. And I want to go ahead and differentiate between like anxiety that needs to be dealt with professionally.
Yes, right. Always a good thing to say.
Maybe the everyday anxiety that all of us experience, right? There are two different things there.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
But all of us deal with anxiousness in some way. So thinking about God, well, there's this amazing name for God that comes out of the scriptures, that he is our peace, or he's the Prince of Peace. And so as we're kind of crafting a prayer, for example, for everyday life, it'll be like, okay, Prince of Peace. Let's start there. Let's start with who God is. Yeah. And then what is it about who God is that meets us where we are? Because that's really the story of the Bible. From Genesis all the way to Revelation is God coming down to meet with his people, to meet them where they are. And then he always does something different there, right? So he meets them where they are, but if they're struggling with sin, he calls it out. Right. And invites them to a new way. If they're struggling with, painful circumstances, he meets them where they are. Jesus weeps with his friends, and then he comforts, right? So God always meets us where we are, but then he does something in that to work on whatever it is we're dealing with in the way that only God can.
Yeah.
So again, going back to anxiousness, Prince of Peace, you're maybe something like, you're present with me. Prince of Peace, you'll never leave me or forsake me. Mm-hmm. And you're with me right now as I'm worried about. And then sometimes we'll even put a blank there, like worried about whatever.
And
or
you're bridging this big gap using the common practice of prayer between the big ancient idea that God or Jesus is the Prince of Peace into an anxious moment that someone's feeling today.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so it'll be like, Prince of Peace, you're with me right now as I experience worry about whatever.
Right.
Help me know your presence. Mm-hmm. Help me know you're here. And then we'll usually make some kind of turn in it toward, now, if this reality sinks in, what does God typically invite us into? And so it could be in that prayer something like, and help me be a peaceful presence for those around me, or something like that.
Right.
So that's kind of the form, like most of our content follows a similar kind of format, which is what are we worried about, stressed about, whatever. How does God meet us there? But then what is God inviting us into, right? How does that shape us?
So when you think about the Bible then, and I know you'll have a good answer here because we've actually talked off air.
Well, we'll find out.
We've talked off air about it. But I think one question that immediately comes to mind when I hear something like that, is I think that sounds a bit like eisegesis.
Yeah.
Right?
You have to be careful.
Where we read ourselves into the Bible.
Totally.
Like, well, if the Bible's not irrelevant, then it must have something to say about anxiety.
Yeah.
So I'm going to look into the Bible for what it has to say about anxiety, because it's some kind of holy textbook or rule book or blueprint for life. And it has every answer I need. And so I'm going to bring my lenses and needs and requests to the Bible and ask it to answer the question.
That's right.
So is that what you guys are doing? I'm leading question here, obviously.
Of course.
But how do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How do you ride that line between eisegesis and exegesis as you're trying to bring an ancient text into today?
And I think a great example of that actually is a word like anxiety, because the word anxious shows up in the Bible. And we have to be careful not to interpret that word the way we think it, what we think it means based on our cultural understanding of anxiety.
That's right. Or our lived experience or something like that.
I think a great example of that was really revolutionizing, a great example of that was revolutionary for me in seminary was we read a book called The History of Christianity in North America and Canada. And I don't remember if it's in the textbook for sure or not, but what happened was it was the first time that I realized the word freedom as an American has a whole world behind it.
That's right. Yes.
It has meaning, it has stories, it has history. And whenever I see the word freedom in the Bible, I tend to put that lens on understanding what freedom is because I grew up in America.
Right.
And so these are the perspectives I have on freedom. These are what I expect of freedom. This is how I would define it, all of those things. And I had this moment of like, well, I wonder what the Bible actually meant by the word freedom before I, know the truth and the truth will set you free.
Oh, man.
You know, right? Oh, yeah. Or is for freedom that Christ has set you free.
Yep.
Right. There's all these.
Oh, man.
There's an American way to read those.
Very much so.
And an American way tends to be like an unbridled, do whatever you want kind of freedom. And every time the Bible talks about freedom, at least Jesus in the New Testament, it's usually a freedom that looks like restricting behavior. Or restricting what I do on behalf of others.
That's right.
Or actually laying down my life and my quote unquote American freedom, the way I would define it in America, for the sake of others.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, Galatians 5:1, like you mentioned, right? It is for freedom that Christ has set you free. Stand firm then and don't be burdened once again by the yoke of slavery.
Right.
Well, slavery, he's talking about sin and all these things I used to do in my life not following Jesus. I used to be free to do those things.
Right.
And now you're saying that if I go back and do whatever I want, then that's actually slavery? and not freedom. So freedom is actually limiting my behavior to the way of Jesus and not being free to do whatever I want. And so we import that idea.
So if we're doing
that's
that,
eisegesis.
right, if we're doing that, that's a problem.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
The opposite, though, is when we look at kind of what the posture of the scriptures are in general. The posture of Jesus, which is a God who comes and meets us where we are. But again, and the but is really important, but then invites us into the life he has for us.
That's right. Yeah.
And so hopefully we're keeping with the spirit of the scriptures by allowing the scriptures to read where we are and invite us into something different. But that requires a lot of work. And so like we do have a team that is like theologically thinking through what the implications of a passage are, or asking some of those really important questions, making sure that we are informed in our way of doing that and not just making the Bible say whatever we want it to say for wherever we're at.
Yeah. Man, that's really interesting. One thing that it's got me thinking about is when you're presenting the Bible to someone and you're trying to show that it's relevant, that it has something to say to them, and you're like, look, the Bible talks about anxiety and you experience anxiety, and it actually has good answers to you today. And that's like one way of bringing in this relevance to people. Is it in some way, is there a danger on the other side of that, of robbing the Bible of its like eternal, like sacred, like to use that word again?
That's a great question.
Like ancient authority. Like I know we tend in the West at least to think that new is better, but a lot of cultures and a lot of things like they hold to the idea that old is better.
Yeah.
And it's closer to the original source of the idea. And so, like, have you experienced that tension of the tail wagging the dog or the cart before the horse kind of thing with it's for today, but it's also very old? Like, how do you present the Bible with that balance?
Yeah, and I think an important thing to always be thinking about is reading the Bible on the Bible's terms.
Love that phrase.
Right?
Yes,
versus reading it on what we hope to get out of it even, right? Because sometimes that's the baggage we bring.
That's right.
Is I'm going to look at the Bible today because I hope to find ... And the truth is you can pretty much make the Bible say just about whatever you want it to say if you
try hard enough.
enough. So there is very much a sense of letting the Bible be what it is and let it speak on its terms.
Let me just pause there and double click on that because let's unpack that phrase. It's one of my favorite phrases as well. And what do we mean by that? And I think I want to clarify because I think people could maybe find that offensive or like off-putting. Or it's like, didn't you just say God meets me on my terms? Or like, doesn't he condescend to me? Didn't Jesus incarnate into the flesh and come to the poor and became poor like them? And doesn't God meet me on my terms?
Of course he does.
You know, right? Yeah. So what do we mean then by approaching the Bible on its terms instead of our own?
And here's the other side of that too. That phrase, let the Bible be the Bible, is a phrase that has been used abusively in the church as well. That's right. To say that what I'm saying the Bible says is what it says. And if you disagree, well, let the Bible be the Bible.
Right.
And it's had a harder edge to it that sometimes has been unhealthy. So there's both sides of that for sure. I think what I mean by it is kind of the sense that it's kind of the sense of we're reading someone else's mail, right?
Yes, that's
Some
right.
people talk about that with the Bible where there was an original audience and the original audience received this, probably would have understood it better at times than we do, because the cultural terms that are used in the Bible for their culture at their time would be much more accessible to them. At the same time, though, I also think about the disciples all the time, that Jesus was using very culturally relevant parables.
Yes.
And the disciples afterwards would come to him and be like,
huh?
What were you saying? Like, I didn't get that. And then Jesus would explain it sometimes with another parable, and they'd walk away like, I don't know.
Which is interesting to think about the parable paradigm and how Jesus continued the ministry of Isaiah.
Yep.
Where it's like, I'm going to speak to you in such a way that makes you more confused so that you won't know.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting thinking about the Bible meeting us on our, like, meeting the Bible on its terms, not our terms, is sometimes we come to the Bible, we do get more confused like the disciples did. And even in that, God's proving a point.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's okay too.
Yeah. It's
right.
okay.
Like, it's okay to not understand fully. At times.
I think I kind of grew up in a tradition where I felt shame if I didn't understand the Bible.
Yeah.
Like if I even admitted that I was confused or struggled with it, that it was something wrong with my faith or something. I don't know if it came from the reformers' use of perspicuity or something like that, but I've grown more comfortable with being like, I don't know what that's talking about.
Yeah, and there's been pressure at times to like, well, what's the plain reading of the text? Just take it for what it is.
Yeah.
And then you find out there's so much more going on here than we realized when we start to learn the cultural context.
That's right. The plain reading of the text could be the most inappropriately culturally colored reading of the text.
Yeah, or there was sarcasm there that we wouldn't have picked up on, or something like that, right?
Or Hebrew idiom, or
hyperbole.
Oh my gosh!
Right, extreme exaggeration to make a point, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think kind of going back to the original part of the question where it was like letting the Bible be ancient is that okay? I think that's part of the beauty of the scriptures, though, is we're getting to read. You know, when we read poetry, for example, even modern poetry, we don't expect to see ourselves in it in the same way that the author who wrote it sees themselves in it.
Absolutely.
Right? Meaning they're expressing where they're at in a very particular way. And the expectation is not that I'm going to get this and that every single line is going to be exactly where I am.
That's right.
But I'm going to read this and I'm going to see some things in it that like blow my mind because, wow, I'm in a very similar spot to where this person
resonate
was.
with what that poet was going through.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think if we try to make the scriptures so much about us and our world, we actually take away some of the mystery of it, the beauty of it. We try to make it fit so well with us that it, because one of the roles that the scripture has is to kind of hold up a mirror and show us our blind spots too.
Yes.
But if it's always meeting us right where I'm at, in a sense, then it doesn't have that power anymore, right? It can't reveal to me, actually, there's a blind spot there. And because the scriptures speaks to that differently, I see that for the first time. And then also, you know, like, why do we read novels? Why do we read those types of things? It's because it's entertaining in one hand, but usually what draws us to a particular novel over and over again, Lord of the Rings, something like that, is because there's like this deeper something happening in the story that just pulls us in and keeps us going.
It just resonates with us.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what the Bible is. The Bible is a story that's been going on for centuries before us and will go on well after we're here, Lord willing, most likely. I don't know what phrase to say after that.
Maranatha.
Right, like come Lord Jesus. And we're in the middle in some ways of a story or toward the end of it or somewhere in it.
We're in it.
You know, N.T. Wright talks about the 6-act play, and we're in like this act where all this stuff has happened before us, and we're learning to live out the implications of the scriptures in the church today, but based on these older stories that are there.
Yeah, I think two things come to mind when you say that. Like, I think about Hebrews,
right,
and that letter, and how the church is suffering, especially the Jews who had started following Jesus. They were being persecuted probably by other people in their tradition, and being tempted to come back and be like, you're abandoning Moses, you're abandoning Abraham, come back to the true faith. And Hebrews is written to say, no, they're living in the story. And their persecution is proving that they're part of the story, because that's how God's people have always been treated. And so they're continuing the story. But he doesn't only do it with Jews. In 1 Corinthians, he's talking to a very pagan church full of Gentiles. And he starts talking to them in 1 Corinthians 10 about like, oh yeah, your ancestors walked through the Red Sea together and ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink. And he loops them into this ancient story and says, yeah, and now you're a part of it. And it is that, like, and he's talking about food sacrificed to idols, which was a very today issue for them. But he brings in this ancient story and says, as people who are now a part and have been grafted into this ancient story, how do those ideas reclaim your today,
right,
when you're talking about whether or not to join in a pagan feast at a temple? It's like that's kind of the tension that you guys are talking about. It's really cool.
Absolutely. And I think too, going back to the idea that like it's someone else's mail. At the same time, there's also this sense that we have in almost everything that's written in Scripture that they knew they would be passing this on in some way. Like when Paul writes letters to even Timothy, the idea is not that that's just going to go to Timothy and stop at Timothy.
That's right.
All of those letters have this sense of going out into the world and being passed on. And even Jesus kind of like looks forward, right, in John 17, when he prays for his disciples, but then prays for all those who will believe on account of their testimony.
Yeah.
So there's this sense in which the Bible is an ancient story about ancient people who were maybe the first hearers of so many of these. At the same time that it would be a story that grafts in the whole world, right? It starts with Israel and then becomes a blessing for the whole world.
Yeah.
And then a sense that this would be passed on. And then there's this sense within the scriptures that others will keep being invited in. And so it's this like continually moving story that sure speaks into today in some ways, but also feels foreign to today. And I also think too, the other piece is this is ultimately God's story.
Yeah.
And, you know, we like to own things. We like it to be ours.
Since when have we done that?
Right? And it is ours in one sense,
Sure,
but it's also not ours.
Yeah.
Right? Like thousands of years of church history and people that have gotten it right and wrong. And we have been given this amazing gift of being a part of a legacy of faith that is passed on to us. And so I think if it becomes too much about where I am right now today, we're missing the fact that actually this is something that we're being gifted, this amazing gift of history.
That's right.
And of the faith. And that also takes pressure off, because then when we get to those things we don't understand, it's like, well, what has the church said about this before?
That's
or
right.
whatever.
I'm
like,
not the only person who's asked this question over the last 3,000
that's
years.
Right. Yep. And sometimes the answer is we still don't really know. Like predestination, free will, where are we going to land? Right. Look through church history and find out like, oh, it's been debated forever. Okay, so I don't have to feel so much pressure to figuring it out right now.
Yeah. The church didn't figure this out and we're all still here.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's such a gift to see like the problems of today, or even the significance of today, or like the aimlessness of today.
Yeah.
That you're not alone today. Like you are part of a much larger story.
Yeah.
And the significance of who you are in that story actually increases when you realize that you're a part of it. And you can be an extremely small part of a very big story.
Yeah.
And that adds a lot of purpose and comfort to your life.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. Why? Let me ask you this question. Why, and maybe I'm begging the question here, but why do you think Bible engaging the Bible, is one of or the best way for people to do what you're talking about, reclaim today? They have a messy life. They're anxious. They're lonely. They're feeling purposeless. They're worried about the past. They're worried about the future. They need to figure out how to get present to be a healthy human.
Right.
And we're like, hey, here's a really old book written in a bunch of other languages. Why the Bible? Obviously, I would believe that too. You know. But like, I'm curious your answer.
Well, I love the way you set that up, especially because I think it helps us. Like, okay, let's take one step back from that question to, okay, who does the Bible tell us is the true source of life change, the one to connect with, right? The Bible points us to God, who is the one that transforms us.
Yes.
In fact, we get really wonky in the evangelical church at times. I'll just say the church in general. We get really wonky in the church in general because sometimes we make the Bible the point.
Yeah.
And the Bible says, no, I'm not the point.
Yes, that's it.
The point is relationship with God.
That's right.
And the very fact that it says that should be really comforting and exciting for us, because that means that this book is like in a way designed to help us connect with God, who is the transformer.
That's right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Transformation comes from God. Yeah. And so God was like, can I give you a way to connect with me, hear from me, let me reveal myself to you so you might know how to be transformed? And I want you to keep going, but I just have to talk about that for a second.
Yeah,
it's like,
go for it.
That is such a huge thing for us, is that idea is relationship with God is the only thing that brings transformation.
Right.
We even say internally a lot, there's a huge difference between Bible engagement and transformative Bible engagement.
Yeah.
And our stance is the difference is, are you seeing Jesus or not?
Mm-hmm.
And we go to 2 Corinthians 3, which we actually quoted talking about freedom earlier.
Yeah, right.
and are you removing the veil? Has the Spirit removed the veil off of your Bible so that you can see the light of the gospel in the face of Jesus Christ? Because only when we behold him do we become like him from one degree of glory to another. So Bible engagement is only helpful insofar as we are beholding the one who gave revelation.
That's right.
Not the revelation itself, but the one to whom it bears testimony.
Yeah.
So anyway, go ahead. I just had to stand
absolutely.
on that soapbox with you.
What is interesting about the Bible in particular as a spiritual practice, so reading, reflecting, and responding, which is kind of how people typically are defining Bible engagement. So more than just reading it, but there's an internalization that happens by reflecting on it.
That's right.
And then not just internalizing it, but then doing something with it.
Yeah.
So responding, and that could be, initially just writing a note to yourself, highlighting something. You could be responding by, thinking about how this impacts your life, what it says about who God is, journaling about that. That could be responding. But then also, and some people are actually thinking about adding another R. There's the 3 R's of Bible engagement. Some people have talked about, should there be relay as a fourth R to tell others about it. But whether that's in responding or whether we need another R, it doesn't matter. I think the point is that we're engaging with this in a more transformative way.
Yeah.
And some of the research that's really interesting, specifically from the Center for Bible Engagement, which is also a part of Our Daily Bread Ministries, is that people who engage the Bible, so read, reflect, and respond on it 4 or more times per week, self-report a lower struggle with some of the core temptations that all of us deal with.
Yep.
And also report an increase in feeling led by the Spirit, seeing the fruits of the Spirit show up in their lives. So love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. So there's an increase in good things and a decrease in bad things by reading, reflecting, and responding on the scriptures 4 or more times per week.
Yeah.
And that research is fascinating. It was, and I think it's important to distinguish there that research was not, they're not saying that if you do this, this will happen. It was more just noticing in the research that when people read, reflect, and respond 4 or more times a week, this seems to be the effect.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think that's an important distinction because sometimes when people they call it the power of 4.
Yes. Oh yeah. I've heard it all around. Yep.
The power of 4. Sometimes when people talk about that, they act as if it's transactional.
If we get people to this place, life transformation is guaranteed.
Yeah. But what it is it drew attention to something that really helps us see that the scriptures, they do something special.
I see. So the point, the point you would like to draw out of that study is it's clear that let me say it this way. It's clear that life transformation comes from Bible engagement.
Yeah, that it comes from engaging with God through the Bible.
That's a better way to say it. There
right? So the idea that something about this old ancient text that has been passed down to us for generations, that when we spend time with it in a regular, sustained manner, it makes a difference in our lives. And of course, it's the God behind it who's making the difference.
Yeah.
But there is something special about this. And there are other important spiritual practices, prayer, obviously, celebration, rest, solitude. We have a whole series that we've built off of those practices. But when it comes to seeing a connection between an activity and a positive outcome in your life, Bible engagement, there's something special there.
Yeah, and just to put a fine point on it, you've kind of made it, but let me just ask the question to get a clear answer on it.
Yeah.
Why does Bible engagement lead to life transformation then? What's the correlation?
Yeah, because I think it connects us with God, right? And by connecting us with God, God transforms us in some really special way. And I think, we mentioned parables earlier, and Kenneth E. Bailey is kind of an expert from the Middle East who he's no longer living, but he did such a good job of putting parables in their context. And I thought parables were such a good picture of what the Bible as a whole is, because when he described parables, he described them as these stories that are immersive.
Yes.
So like going to if you've ever been to a family entertainment center and gone to like a 4D, 5D, 7D theater, right?
Which at some point they're lying with how many Ds
right,
there are,
right,
okay?
exactly.
This is 4D, leave it alone.
But you might be sitting in a chair that moves.
Yep.
The movie's in 3D. You're going to go under the water and bubbles are going to pop out. Yep. There's going to be wind that blows on your neck, right? This idea that it's an immersive experience. And when he describes parables, he says that they're like immersive experiences where if you enter the story, instead of trying to find one point out of it, or instead of trying to allegorize it and make everything stand for something, if you just let yourself soak in the story, it changes the way that you view God, the way you view yourself, the way you view others, the way you view the world. It has a transformative effect. I think it's a great micro picture of what the whole Bible is, which is it's this big story that points to Jesus, either point directly to him or at least our need for him. Yep. And when we're in this immersive story, it transforms the way we see God, the way we see ourselves, the way we see others, the way we see the world. And then it usually asks something of us to lean into this in some way. And I think it's that kind of interaction that has such a transformative effect.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating to think about the Bible as parabolic in itself, because then it necessitates a very huge view of history as parabolic, that God has been telling a cosmological parable, like throughout human history, of saying, can I show you my goodness and beauty? Can I show you your depravity and need? Can I and you can map those core truths onto the cosmos and onto history, because the Bible's telling the story of the world through a certain lens, through God's lens, and we're like, oh, this is just the story of humanity,
right? And
so God has been telling us the story of himself from the beginning. It's very cool to think about that immersion into the story. Can I be persnickety?
Yeah, go for it.
How does viewing the Bible as parabolic not rob it of its accuracy or of its historicity?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, it's a micro picture of what the Bible is. The Bible has so many different types of genres within it, and we need to let each genre be what it is, right? So when the Bible's trying to be history, we should let it be history.
That's right.
And when it's a parable, now Jesus's parables are also, though, very historic, meaning they're using very clear pictures of things that people would see, understand, know, because they're interacting with those every day, right? When he talks about a shepherd who's looking for a sheep, there are shepherds in the audience who look for sheep.
He's like, oh yeah,
right. So there's a historic nature to even those parables. But to your point, what we're not saying is that the whole Bible then has like a lack of truth or a lack of...
the whole Bible is just making up stories to prove
to try to shape us or in some way or something. There is a very real sense in which the Bible, especially in like Chronicles, in the Kings, stuff like that. Now they're making theological points often.
It's theological history.
It's theological history, but it is also like when the gospel writers, especially Luke's the best example of this. How does he start his gospel? Right? I set out, Theophilus, to write an orderly account for you. I've done the research. I've looked. I've read the things. I've talked to the people. I want you to have an accurate picture of what happened with Jesus so that why? So you can have confidence in what you've believed. So the Bible's full of accurate historical moments, usually interpreted through a theological lens about what God's doing. And so totally to your point. If you're trying to say the whole Bible is just this one big parable to try to teach us something, that's definitely not what the Bible is.
But it is fascinatingly stretching to see how God can work in, orchestrate, whatever word you want to use, inside history to have a historical chain of events with the kingdom of Israel and her kings that the chronicler could report on in a historically verifiable way that does form these kind of micro parables and lessons. And don't you see that when someone's proud, they fall? And don't you see when someone's humble, they rise? That actually happened. and it's very theologically interesting.
Right.
And there's this like two things happening at the same time. And I just think that's so interesting too, as we look at the Bible on its own terms, even as literature.
Yep.
I when I preach, we've been preaching through Mark at our church, and it's like, I get up there and I preach, and I've had some people kind of be like, hey, walk me through how you got here. Yep. Because I'm showing the literary design of Mark,
yep,
and how he's using different stories positioned in different ways, and then putting this story at the center of them,
right,
to say, here's the main point. And
yep.
they're like, so did he go out of order in Jesus's life? And I'm like, maybe, but his point isn't this happened, then this happened, then this happened. There's something far more important on the line, and he's trying to show a Jewish audience that Jesus is the Messiah and the Son of God. That trumps the order of events. And he wasn't, and no one would have read that thinking, oh, this must have been the chronological order of events. That's a very Western biographical view to have of the Bible. But it's this more like beautifully layered view to where, well, then did those things in Jesus' life happen in Mark? Of course they did.
Yep.
But he's arranging them in a way to make a bigger point, and a more beautiful point than just laying out the story. And just the story would have been great. Yeah. But he's organizing it in a way that makes it like just beautiful.
Yeah, and that's what helps us with 4 accounts of then Jesus' life.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's also sometimes what makes it difficult, because we're like, wait a second, this gospel has this order of events. This one has a different order of events, but the same events. So which one do I trust?
Oh, right.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's like, no. All those events happened. Yeah. What you should trust is what the events are pointing to, which is Jesus is not a human in the way that everybody else thinks he is. Yep. He is a human, but he's also God. Yeah. Right?
Well, it's like we can even do the same thing today as the gospel authors, where you and I might have 2 different conversations with people about the prodigal son and that parable that Jesus told. And I might talk to them because they're in a really rough spot. Yeah. And I'd be like, you can still run back to the Father. And Jesus told this parable to show that he's waiting for you. He wants to wrap you up and bring you back into his family. And then you might have a conversation with somebody about the prodigal son who is feeling like they've been at church their whole life and they've been overlooked. And you're like, oh yeah, Jesus told a story about this, where a younger snotty-nosed brother comes home and the older brother's offended. Mm-hmm. And he's like, haven't you always been with me? And you're the older brother. It's like, well, so which story did Jesus tell? A story about a younger brother or older brother? Mm-hmm. Your gospel accounts differ. I was like, no, we're speaking to 2 different audiences, making different points about the same story that did historically happen. Yeah. So we can do that today even. Right. I just think it's fascinating.
And sometimes we do that when we share even our modern history.
That's right. Oh, yeah.
We reorder events because we're trying to make a different point. Yeah. Right? So we're not saying that the events happened for sure in this order. We're saying, hey, remember this event? This happened in that event. Remember that event? This happened in that event. Remember this event? That happened. If you put those together, what do you get? So we're trying to make a point by using 3 different stories, but the point that we're not trying to make is, let me tell you the order of the stories.
That's right. Yep.
That's a different. Right. That would be a different point.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Yeah, man, this has been a fun conversation. What as people are listening and they're wondering, like, man, I love this idea of reclaiming today, bringing the Bible or through these prayers you kind of talked about into my everyday life. Like, how would you encourage people to get involved with what you're doing and use some of the resources you're making?
Sure. Yeah. It kind of depends on which resource would be most helpful for where they're at. Yeah. So I'll just mention a couple. One is the way our website is designed is to kind of open the door for whatever it is that someone is walking through, thinking about, experiencing. So reclaimtoday.org, front page, I'm thinking about whatever, and then there's a blank there. Mm-hmm. And by typing something in there, they'll get hopefully the type of content that they're looking for. And it could be, I'm feeling anxious, or it could be, I'm thinking about, one of the stories we just talked about or something like that. So that's one way. Another way is we do have some content around the spiritual practices, the disciplines, the habits that the church has kind of passed down to us. So whether that's habits of fasting and confession, right? Some of the harder spiritual disciplines, or ones about celebration and rest and silence, solitude, those types of things. We have kind of introductory level versions of those. So intro videos, 12 different ways you could try the practice out, and then an email journey that goes with it, where just 2 emails a month-ish that help people kind of remember what the month is, what we're talking about, how to practice, whatever it is, whether it's silence or rest or something like that. So that's another thing that could be helpful. And then our social channels, that's where we started, was just on social. Yeah. And so Instagram, Facebook, TikTok are easy places to find us. Just Reclaim Today or Reclaim.today, depending on which one. And a lot of our prayers are there. So the prayers for everyday life, and you can find those on our website and other places too, but prayers for doing the dishes or doing laundry, prayers for dealing with self-destructive habits, prayers for dealing with porn addiction, those types of things. And the prayer isn't going to solve it, but hopefully it connects you with God who can meet you where you're at.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, that's so good. ReclaimToday.org.
Yep.
Love what you guys, and everything's free, right?
Yep. Everything's free. Yep. We do have some paid things that you can get, like prayer cards and stuff like that. But yeah, all that content's just free, ready to go.
That's awesome. Yeah. Man, Daniel, so appreciate what you're doing, man. Yeah. Glad to have you as a friend and glad to introduce you to all of our Spoken Gospel family here.
Thanks so much, man.
Dude, it's been a really fun conversation. So thank you all for joining us today on this little nerd out on Bible engagement. We're really thankful for you guys, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Spoken Gospel Podcast. Spoken Gospel creates short films, devotionals, and podcasts like this one. Everything we make is free because of generous supporters like you. To see our resources, visit spokengospel.com or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for listening. See you next time.